All right, today we got Michael Harlin, two-time MLF champion, 2022 Plains Angler of the Year, Toyota Series. What's up, man?
Nothing. Just chilling, chasing rugrats around. Can't fish. You know how cold it is out there. So it's like
Chilling in the cold. Let's see what
3 degrees
my
or
watch
whatever it
says.
is.
Yeah, it's 9 degrees right now. Started off at like -1 today. It's
Yeah.
pretty terrible.
Not much bassing going on out there. So instead, we're cooped up in the house chasing kids around.
The biggest problem for me is like the whole next week, even when it does warm up a little bit, I don't want to like rip the wrap off the side of my boat from the ice because I've heard that happen to guys before.
Yeah, well, we fished that Toyota Series up here at Ozarks in 2021, and we were dealing with the lake freezing every day, and there was guys peeling keel guards off and all kinds of stuff. Thankfully, none of that happened to me. I was borrowing somebody's boat, but yeah, I definitely heard some horror stories from the ice.
Yeah, so that same week, like the lakes completely froze over. And the week before that tournament, we were at Grand for the national championship.
That's right.
And every day running down the lake, you could hear the ice cracking. It was pretty thin, but you could hear it cracking as you were going down the lake, which was kind of cool. But at the same time, it tears some things up.
So where I live on kind of a peninsula on the lake, so I have water all around me. I can't see the lake. I can this time of year with no leaves on the trees, but I can hear the boats really good. And that week of that Toyota Series that the lake was frozen, I mean, I'm telling you, it is the most horrific sound you've ever heard. Boats running through that ice. It sounds unbelievable. And
you could hear it from your house?
Oh, yeah. I mean, loud as could be for miles. You could hear them breaking ice running through. I'm like, I'm not going out there. First of all, it wasn't even my boat. I'm not going to tear somebody else's boat up. But going into the last day,
no crap.
I was leading going into the last day. Well, boat one, you're going out first. And so we're like,
you're tearing up all the ice.
Oh, yeah. Mark McWall turns us loose. He's like, all right, there's no ice out there. Let her rip. So I came out of the glaze, made a left at the moorings, and got to the mouth of the glaze. Solid sheet ice, the whole lake. 20 miles I ran through it, just throwing ice outside both sides of the boat. You could see it skidding across the ice for hundreds of yards.
No way.
It was wild. Oh yeah. Thankfully it didn't tear the boat up at all. We got there and it was fine, but it was just kind of skimmed up. But you could literally see the ice flying, I mean, all the way across the lake from me breaking it. It was nuts.
That's crazy. I guess it wasn't like that bad at Grand, and I'm guessing because it's a lot wider. Lake Ozarks is a lot more condensed, you know.
And it's a little warmer too, I think. It probably wasn't probably the water temps weren't quite as cold.
Probably not. Yeah. A little bit further south. Well, so today we got a couple topics that we wanted to hit on, which is, first of all, we're both fishing the invitationals this year. We both did last year, and why we're fishing those instead of the MPFL or the Opens like a lot of guys are going to. And then we also want to talk about the differences between like Table Rock, the White River versus Lake of the Ozarks, especially during the wintertime, because for me, one of my worst tournament lakes, and it's so much different than Table Rock is.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
for sure.
And then the mental side of fishing, because I think that it gets harder and harder as we get older. It seems like for me, because you got a lot more going on in your life. But you still have to stay competitive. Like, we still have to be better than we were yesterday. So it takes a lot of effort. And there's just a lot of, like I said, stuff going on with your life. When you got kids running around the house that you have to worry about and things like that. So I'm not at that point yet, but I know you've been dealing with that for a while.
Yeah, it's coming. You just wait.
Yeah.
It turns things upside down in a hurry. That's for sure. But I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, first of all, I wanted to start with kind of talking about last season. So you have 10 top 10s with Major League Fishing in 61 tournaments. So you've had a really good MLF career. And last year, the first 3 tournaments of the Invitationals, you start off 8th, 33rd, and 22nd. And I'm pretty sure you're leading Rookie of the Year at that point, right?
Yeah, I was in 5th going into Ozarks.
Dang. And then a tough second half of the season.
Yeah, truthfully, I don't really know what happened. I don't think that it was a mental thing or anything like that,
right,
where I was on a skid. It just was a bad streak. Like, I wasn't really struggling on the water, I was still having really good practices, and I just think that I mismanaged some things. Ozarks definitely made some bad decisions. I was on a lot of good fish here. Like, I mean, I was very confident going into the first day of the tournament, but that tournament, for instance, most of the bed fishing I've done in my career has not really been here. I've kind of learned on the fly. I had a top 5 at Grand bed fishing, and I was in like
in the
third or
Toyota.
fourth at Eufaula this year bed fishing, and every one of the tournaments I've ever fished, the key was finding the bass that were like really hard to see, that people were overlooking,
Right.
and ones that were more skittish than other people were looking, in harder places to look. And that's what I found. And I found a lot of big ones, but they were hard to catch. I've really never had so much trouble catching them. And the problem was the lake was coming up a little bit, if I remember right. And we had just the most insane wave of fish come up I've ever seen. And looking back on the footage, to be quite honest, I couldn't really watch live the last day after I got cut. I probably watched like 30 or 45 minutes of it, but watching highlights and what I did watch, those guys were going 100 miles an hour looking for beds the size of the hood of your truck, with them sitting dead in the middle of it. Like, just the most obvious, easy to catch, stupid fish in the lake that, were pulling up overnight and making beds. And here I was fishing for fish that were in 4 foot of water I could barely see,
Right.
and we had cloudy conditions that week anyway. So it just was a tough deal for me. And I learned a lot that week, but that went to the Potomac and literally had like 2 of the 3 best days of practice I've ever had at the Potomac. Thought I was going to wax them.
Really?
And just didn't manage the tide stuff right. I mean, if you're grass fishing, you can't run around. And that's what I found myself doing, was running around quite a bit. And had a good practice at lacrosse too. It just didn't really work out well. So, I mean, it's just one of those deals. Hopefully learned the lessons I needed to learn where I can, build on that next year.
Right. So it's kind of crazy to me. Like, whenever guys have, it seems like they just have that ball that's rolling, like you can't be stopped by anything. But in this instance, like, it still was rolling for you. It's just that, certain things happen, or little decisions that you make on the water can change your whole season. Just like you said at Potomac, it was just a little decision of, do I stay here for 30 more minutes and see if it happens, which it could when the tides change, or, am I wasting my time? Should I go somewhere else? So, like, that tournament, for example, I had a bad tournament. I finished in the hundreds. This is the only one that I finished in the hundreds, and that was my problem too. Is like, it's really hard to sit there whenever you only have a couple fish in your live well. You have a small bag, and like, wait for it to get right. Like, as guys that fish lots of brush, and we're fishing targets here, like we want to move and cover water till we get bites. So, like, how was your practice there? Like, did you just sit down, put the troll motor down, and go fishing, and that's why it was good, because you were there when the tide was right?
Well, I think the first day, yeah, I was just fishing a lot, but what ended up happening was I was catching them off a lot of structure stuff, like where it's pretty obvious, and stuff that I had caught them on, and I knew that it was probably going to happen, but like duck blinds and stuff like that were super obvious, were like the first few days of the tournament or practice were automatic. Like, anywhere you found something like that had enough water on it, I was catching fish like, 2 3/4, 2.5, 2 3/4 to 3-something pounds. I wasn't catching giants, but that's pretty good. And that just fizzled. It was getting hit a lot. The guys know what to look for. And I was lacking those like really good grass spots that were reloading for people and stuff like that. And I don't know, just ended up being a tough tournament. I found the fish. I mean, I had one grass flat up towards Belmont that was absolutely loaded. Brad and I worked together quite a bit in that tournament, probably more than any other all year. And at one point, we were both on the same grass flat catching like 3-pounder, trying to shake them off, and they're jumping, and like had really good, like it was good. And go back there in the tournament, and the first day didn't catch anything. The second day, I'm like, I'm staying there. I'm milking that area, and I caught like 12 keepers, and the biggest one was like 15 inches. Like, they just the size completely changed on me. And the other thing I had going in that tournament was Woman, and it just got fished too hard. I will say I think was the first day of the tournament on Saturday.
Yeah, it was something weird like that. Yeah.
Because there was pleasure boats everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we don't have to deal with here that we see everywhere else we go on tour is the silt and like the clay and the mud and stuff that gets turned up from boat traffic. Like we don't have that problem here. I mean, Ozark's one of the most traffic lakes in the country, and you don't get this like mud line or silt or whatever from people running back and forth. And like when in Mattawoman on that first day, the boats were going in and out of all those places, just cutting and stirring everything up, and it just completely looked way different than it did in practice. And that, coupled with all the pressure and all those people in there, it just wasn't. It didn't end up being very good, and it has in the past been good. And maybe if it was in the middle of the week, it'd have been better. But a lot of the guys that I was fishing around are really good. Brett Height and Tristan McCormick and guys like that, and they didn't catch them either. Like everybody I was around didn't catch them. And I
wonder
know
if that's one of the big. I wonder if that's one of the bigger factors there, because like Tristan McCormick, he's been there 2 or 3 times, and he's gotten a top 10 2 or 3 times. Like he smashes them every time. And then he had a tough time. Was a big factor is the weird scheduling that we had with that, because like you said too, it stirs everything up in like the grass. There's so much grass there, it throws up little pieces of grass that are floating everywhere, so it's harder to fish, and it just doesn't look as good.
I had another like unfortunate situation in that tournament. I was on some really good shallow fish too, like real shallow. It's not arrowheads, but it's real similar to arrowheads. I forget what they call it. I was catching fish on high tides around the harder cover, real shallow, and one of those spots that I was catching them on was in the back of Quantico. Well, I run in there and practice the day I found all that and sat down in the middle of Quantico. Well, anybody that paid attention to that tournament, that was the deal. Like that was where most of the guys, like most of the checks were cut in the middle of Quantico on eelgrass. And I sat down there and idled around, and I'm like, oh, this stuff looks good. There was nice edges and things like that. There was a lot of very big names sitting out there in the middle. I'm like, this is good.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really fished it very hard. It was like the last day of practice, and it was the end of the day, and I was just kind of mentally fizzled. You know how that gets. And I just overlooked it. Well, first day of the tournament, I start in the back there, and as I run out, I see I see Nick Hatfield and Sheffield and Cody Meyer and all these guys that had really, really good tournaments. And I had to run right by him to get out of there. Well, end of the day, I'm like, oh, he whacked him. He whacked him. He whacked him. He whacked him. Wonder where that was. Second day, I run to the back of Quantico where I'd found those fish, didn't catch anything, and I had to run right by all those guys again. And I knew that that's where they were catching them, and I found where they were catching them. But because I didn't catch any there in practice, I just didn't feel right about fishing it.
Right.
Like it just didn't feel right to me. Plus, I was so deep in a hole that I probably wasn't going to make the cut anyway, and I just didn't want to be that guy.
Yeah, and that's crazy that you say that too, because I fished Quantico 2 separate times for over an hour in practice, and I caught like a handful of fish, like little ones, but nothing that great. And I tried to cover a lot of water in there, and there was all those guys that, like you said, there's a lot of big names in there. You're like, there's got to be fish in here. It's got to be good. And I just never like had very many bites to feel confident to even fish it. I don't know. That place was pretty strange to me.
Yeah, and like had I caught fish there in practice out there in the middle, like where those guys were all sitting, I would have felt way better about, even if I caught one fish, I'd have felt better about pulling up there and fishing in the tournament. But I just was like, that's not the right thing to do. Like you know what I mean? That just wasn't the deal. So I just went on about my day and tried to find them elsewhere, and it didn't really work.
Right. Well, I think that it seems like it was fairly tough on both of us this season, and I don't want to say tough. Like we both had good tournaments,
ups and downs,
but ups and downs, a lot of ups and downs, and it was more of a shallow schedule. Like we started in Florida, which you did great at, and then we end on 2 river fisheries.
I got lucky though. I got lucky. Yeah, I mean that was lucky, but. Yeah, what you're saying is like it was a shallow schedule, and I'm assuming you're going to say that this year the schedule
it's rotating. But I've noticed a trend though. Over the past 4 years, it's rotated Like the year before last was a deep schedule. It was an offshore, deeper schedule. And last year was the shallow river schedule. And now we're kind of moving back to the deep offshore schedule because we're starting in Texas. We have a post-spawn offshore tournament. We have 2 smallmouth fisheries, and the other shallow fishing. I mean, we got Kentucky Lake and West Point. Where they're going to be up there. But I think it's going to set up. I'm more excited about it. Not that I wasn't excited before, but like, dude, getting to go to Rayburn instead of Okeechobee. I mean, it's the kind of fishing that we like to do: fishing brush, fishing deep, trying to find targets to throw at. So, I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you feel better about this season than last season because of that?
Oh yeah, for a number of reasons, I feel better about this season. But the schedule, if I'm being honest, played a pretty big part in my decision and where I wanted to fish this year. And it was just late in the year that and we'll talk about this, but it was late in the year that that decision was being made on my part. So I really didn't want to make any changes too late in the year. But looking at the schedule, I remember when it came out, I was like, "Ooh, the schedule looks good." Like we get to go catch smallmouth, which obviously plays into our advantage, even though we don't. That's not something we've done a lot. I personally have never even done it. I've never been to any of those northern smallmouth lakes like that. But just based off what I've seen and what I know, I feel like that's tenfold better for what I like to do than going to the Potomac and La Crosse. Like, give me a break.
Yeah.
Champlain and the Detroit River versus Potomac and La Crosse, I'm taking that 10 times out of 10. So that and Rayburn and all that, I was excited. I was very excited. I've been to Kentucky lots and lots of times. I never caught them there, but I still know it. I'm familiar with it. So, the schedule to me is way more exciting and suits our style a lot better.
Yeah, and here's something that's interesting about it though is, so I travel with Drew Gill, and he had a phenomenal season last year, live scoping on the shallow schedule, because he was kind of fishing for fish that nobody else was fishing for, right? Or that people weren't looking for. Like we were just up there shallow, throwing baits at the bank,
Trying to do what you're supposed to do.
But yeah, right, doing what you're supposed to do. But this schedule, everyone knows to fish offshore, so it's it's different. Like I think we're pretty decent at it, but we're going up against a lot of guys who are also good at it, and that's why they're at the level that they're at. And everyone knows to go scan around and find as much as possible. And there's a lot of guys that are good at it. So it seems like to me too, like whenever tournaments are won, people have at minimum their own. They're doing something different. So like in a deep schedule, is there something that you prepare yourself for, like looking at this to try to be different than everyone else, or are you just going to grind it out and try to beat everybody?
Well, first, with what Drew did to us last year and just being out there with those guys, I really quickly realized like I may be decent at the forward facing sonar and electronics gig here, but on tour, I ain't that guy. Like I'm not nearly where I needed to be skills wise with that. And so since July, August, somewhere in there, maybe I really have like spent a lot more time trying to hone in the details of it and get better at what I'm doing. And I think that's really proved itself to me here through the winter months. Like so far, it hadn't hardly been winter until now, but just I'm finding stuff and fishing areas that like differently than I've ever seen. Like I'm seeing it through a different lens. And so I've definitely been working on my active target skills, leading into the year. But like you said, there's something to be said for going against the grain a little bit. Drew was scoping when he wasn't supposed to be scoping, and it obviously showed that it works. So maybe there will be something to be said for going up there shallow and trying to bang it out and maybe catch them up that way. But it's a tough crowd to catch them, trying to scope when you're supposed to be scoping, So yeah. I don't know.
Well, and there's a lot of young guys. Like last year, I knew that the competition was going to be good, but it was better than I thought it was going to be. And I think that's how the case on a lot of tours. Like you're like, oh, you got 50th place. But whenever you're actually there, you're like, damn, I had to try really, really hard and catch a lot of fish to get 50th place because these guys are good. It's like a different level. So I think that's going to continue. I mean, I know a lot of guys left and people are switching around where they're going, but there's still a lot of young guys that are really good at catching fish that they see. And I think that that's kind of going to be the thing that sets people apart this season is figuring out how to catch those fish that most people aren't targeting. And what I mean by that is fish that aren't sitting on anything. You know, even when we're literally at every single one of these tournaments, I think that's going to play a huge role. And I don't know, it's going to be 50-50. Doing what I normally do, 50%, and try something different, 50%. Find floating fish, you know, fish that just aren't on anything. But there's a big
But
problem with that too, in that they move around a lot.
they move
And
around a lot, and those floating fish are very obvious out there. Like they stick out like a sore thumb. And so
they do.
my personal opinion is the fish have an incredible ability to disappear on the bottom. I don't care whose electronics you
They do.
have.
Yeah.
If they get down on the bottom, you can't find them. And I'm sure you've seen it. And a lot of people have that spend any time doing it. Those days where like you're out there scoping, shining your beam around, shining the flashlight around, you're like, there's no fish in here. Where'd they all go? Like
Mm-hmm.
they aren't. If they're not off the bottom, they're not gone. They're still there. And you know, you have that one magical deal where you draw a fish out the bottom or you hook one or whatever, and it just blows up. And there
Yep.
was hundreds of them down there. I mean, there's going to be something to be said for that and finding those spots, maybe with your side scan or down imaging or hard spots or something like that, where you can't necessarily see the fish with your spotlight, and you have to actually catch them or get them fired up for them to show themselves. Because those fish that out there that float out there by themselves, I mean, that's shooting fish in a barrel. Sure, it's really hard to get them to bite at times, or actually get them, you know, to commit enough that you can catch them. But those are the ones that everybody's fishing for, and we're definitely gonna have to try to go against the grain to set yourself apart a little bit. Because I mean, every year this forward facing sonar thing is snowballed. Like when I won the
Yeah,
Toyota
it
here at
has.
Ozarks in 2021, nobody was doing it, or very few. And then I mean, it showed itself in the next year. There was everybody was doing it, and then you get to the tour level, like what we're fishing, and then literally everybody is on that deal. Like you're no better than anybody else. It's hard to set yourself apart as far as that goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, it gets more and more dialed every year. Like you think, like I hear people say that, oh, shallow fishing is going to be the next live scope. Like it's going to beat everyone. But the live scope, like
They're just
the
scoping
forward
shallow.
facing sonar game, it gets more and more dialed, and you can catch fish in a foot of water or in the middle of the main river channel. Like it doesn't matter where you're at. I mean, besides like thick grass is like, you know, one of the places it's hard to fish, but it doesn't really matter the depth. Like people are getting better at figuring out how to catch these fish. And like you on the bottom, say they're offshore schooling, and you can throw a bait and catch those fish just by making the same cast. But then again, you probably get beat by someone who is trying to pick out the biggest fish that they see and throwing to that fish. You know, I mean, there's just like it just gets more and more dialed, and it's a hard game to play. It really is because we have to stay up to date with like how to get this fish to bite. Like, what are we going to be able to throw this year that someone didn't have last year? Like, how are we going to be ahead of everyone? So, like, I've been ordering all kinds of random crap that probably won't work, but you know, you got to
You
keep
never
trying.
know. And then you got guys like, well, you may even have all this stuff that's sneaky coming out, Berkeley stuff nobody's had.
Yeah, the
Well,
Berkeley stuff. Yeah,
some
yeah.
people have probably had, like there's lots of stuff like that that if you can have your hands on it for a while, they haven't seen it. That's definitely gonna be big. But I personally don't have that opportunity. Like I have what I have. I buy what I buy off the shelf for the most part, and so it's hard to be sneaky as far as that stuff goes. Everybody knows what's out there, so uh, I don't know. There's definitely something to be said though for throwing baits that other people aren't.
Yeah, for sure. I've had some of those baits since June. Um, um, like the Credge is the biggest one they've been talking about, for example, but it sinks really slow, so it's like a. I'm sure you've seen some videos. I feel like it's more of a summertime bait, or you know, something where you can catch them within 10 feet of the surface. Like lacrosse, I caught him over the top of wing dams on it a little bit. Um, so I think it's, you know, it's going to definitely play in some certain situations, and like brush pile fishing too, because it kind of sinks backwards. I mean, it's like a, I don't know. It's like a weird jerk bait. It's like a sinking jerk bait almost, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Like it's
kind of
full of
cool. It's
water
cool
or
to have different
something.
stuff. Do what?
Like it's full of water or something.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Interesting, but yeah, you kind of gotta like, and that's another thing is like all the Japanese guys with their weird techniques that were like, oh, that's so weird. I would never throw that. Well, a lot of them get a lot of top tens and have really good tournaments by throwing their weird stuff, you know, and it keeps them ahead of the game.
Yeah. No, I've
So
definitely spent a lot of time paying attention as close as I can to what those guys are doing.
yeah,
Like Koya and Taku and guys like that, like they're setting the bar. I mean, that's been the history of bass fishing from the beginning for the most part, is the trends start in Japan and work their way from west to east coast. So like they're definitely ahead of the curve, and you gotta be willing to adapt and learn new techniques and new baits.
yeah, definitely. That's how you have to stay part of the game. Like the old guys that are, you know, using live scope right now and making themselves relevant or staying relevant, I guess. It's like you have to do that to stay up there. So one of the big topics that we wanted to hit was why are we staying with MLF? So I didn't ever really consider fishing the opens or fishing the MPFL. I thought about it, but it was never a real consideration because I like the way that MLF is structured, payouts and everything. But talk a little bit about your off-season decisions and kind of like what the points were that almost made you fish the opens. I mean, you guys were considering it there for a while.
Yeah, and just like everybody, I would say I grew up watching the Elite Series, and that's near and dear to my
Yep.
heart. Like in my mind, that's always been where I wanted to probably end my career. But at the same time, I wouldn't be who I am without Major League Fishing. Being Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri guy, MLF comes here constantly for Toyotas and BFLs and things like that, and that's just what I had in my fingertips to fish. And that's where I cut my teeth. That's where I learned how to do what I do. And I'm attached to it. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely part of who I am as an angler. But at the same time, obviously you can't ignore all the stuff that's been going on. And certainly don't like a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of negativity surrounding the company. I don't like that. I feel like a lot of the things that have been said and done by MLF, it kind of clouds the anglers a little bit. It takes some credibility from them and what they've worked for. So we definitely were in heavy consideration to go to the opens. But for me, right now, at this point in my life, fishing is how I put food on the table. It's how I make my living. That's the only way pretty much that I make any money. I sell a little bit of real estate, but for the most part, the last 3 years has all been fishing. I've got 3 kids now and a family that I have to take care of and a lot of bills I got to pay. And fishing the opens is basically like fishing, Toyota series all across the country. Yeah, sure, it's been great. Toyotas have been great to me regionally the last 3 years. But if you take me and put me at Okeechobee or the East Coast or wherever, that definitely makes things harder. It's a bigger field that pays less. You get the last check in MLF, you're getting 8 or 10 grand as opposed to I don't know exactly what it is, but 2,000 something for bass. It's a bigger field and it's not paying near as good, like 40 grand, 50 grand to win as opposed to 100 grand to win in the invitationals.
Right. And I
If I
think
had all,
one of the big things that it gets talked about a lot is, okay, well, payouts are a lot less, but I'm paying 3 grand less in entry fees, per tournament. So like the entry fees are way less, but I'm pretty sure you guys worked out the numbers and it similarly compares though, even though it's a lot less to expenses wise, right?
yeah. So if you put you put a pen and paper to it and figure out like how much you spend versus how much you make, it's actually pretty close. But I couldn't fish nationally on tour what we're doing, the invitationals or whatever, if it weren't for sponsors. Like I can't afford to
Yeah.
spend $30,000 in entry fees and $20,000 in travel and other expenses. So if I'm going to be helped That way with sponsors, and say I'm not paying entry fees. Well, if you go to the opens, that will pay for your travel and your entries, basically. Say you have 30 grand, you can pay for everything in the opens with that money. Well, that leaves your earnings to pay the bills, or that's what you get to take home.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to make $2,000 three times, next year, or cash a check in half of them, I'm sitting on basically nothing. Like that doesn't go very far. But if I go cash 3 or 4 checks in the invitationals, and I make 10 grand or 12 grand or 14, I made at Okeechobee, like that moves the needle. That helps. And so if I'm going to have my expenses paid for, I'd rather be fishing for as much money as I can. On the biggest platform I can. And we get great exposure. I had a live camera twice last year in the invitationals. If I wouldn't have stunk it up so bad, I'd have kept the camera. And that type of thing helps build your brand, and it helps get your exposure out there. So media wise, camera wise, live coverage wise, and ultimately check cashing the invitationals outweighs the opens pretty severely to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the way it's been for many years now. I mean, all through college, like every year I would sit down and like look at the numbers and like how are you able to survive as an angler? And a lot of the guys on the Elite Series came up through the pro circuit, fishing MLF, because it was such a good place to fish, and you get good coverage, and there's good payouts, and you get to do all these things still. And it's always been like that, even though recently there's been some changes to the invitational. So they took away the championship, changed the payouts. It's still a better way to go, I think. And like you were saying with coverage, like I got a live camera twice too. There was constantly camera boats around, so you get pictures. They do great with articles and stuff like that. And I feel like that's not as true with the opens. It seems like they really maybe target the handful of guys that get more attention, which, I mean, that's how it goes. I mean, if you're better, if you're well known, like that's what sells. But for us coming up, it's really great that they try to help us, that like they want to have their eyes on the next dude that, does good, or, goes up to the Bass Pro Tour or whatever. And that's what I really appreciated about them. And I think another big decision going into it was how the Bass Pro Tour is changing. They're on a schedule right now to drop their field down to 50, which means that they're only taking 5 anglers instead of 8 from the invitational. So, that kind of hurts as well. It makes it harder for us to move up to that next level because, I mean, once you get to the Bass Pro Tour, the payouts are better than almost anywhere, and it gives you a lot of opportunity, especially if there's only 50 anglers in the field. But that also makes it tougher on us. I don't know. It's kind of hard with everything changing to like try to make the best decision for us.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough time in bass fishing. There's no doubt. I mean, if you ask any seasoned pro, they're going to tell you it's the hardest time to come up there's ever been. So we definitely have it dealt to us tough from the beginning, and they make it hard to make any decisions. Like obviously the MPFL is also on the table. I had the opportunity, probably like you did, to go fish that if I wanted to, and we thought about that as well. I mean, heck, they're coming to Lake the Ozarks in October, so but that's the ceiling, right? So it doesn't get any bigger than that. And there's something to be said for the media outlets that Bass and MLF have. But for me, I feel like MLF has made me who I am as far as the tournaments I fished, and I've built regionally anyway. I built a fairly good platform for myself. But the second you make that switch to Bass, none of those guys know who we are, dude. They don't know us. Mm-hmm. They don't care. Yeah. Right. You got to go prove yourself again. And as to where, like, in MLF going into Ozarks, I had a camera in my boat on the first day because I was expected to catch them. I didn't. It didn't work out. But still, MLF knew who I was, and they trusted that I was going to catch them, or at least be good on camera. And that's an opportunity you're not going to get in the opens. I'm not. So, like, my whole plan once I knew I was going to take the next step, even before that, right? ever since I've been with MLF and I've dreamed of being a professional angler, my plan subliminally has always been I'm going to build myself as an angler. I'm going to become a pro. I'm going to learn how to be a pro, build my brand, build my platform and my sponsorships, my endorsements to where I can jump back to major or bass if I want to and take all that with me. I'll take my brand and my sponsors, and then you don't have the stress of, cash and checks in the opens to go and put pressure on yourself to qualify. Like I'd rather go at a time where I feel like I could take 3 or 4 years to qualify because I've already established myself as a pro, similar to what the guys that have gone back to bass have done. You can't tell me it's not easier on guys that have, sponsors and things like that they don't have to catch them, right? And so that definitely makes that a lot easier. And that's kind of way I've always felt about it, that I'd rather learn how to be a pro and grow with MLF. And if the time is right, when the time is right, then make the transition.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to do it, especially because sponsorships now are so much and like your presence, like how many people know you, how many people do you influence? And like you said, a lot of those guys that are able to go fish the opens for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, like those are those type of guys that have the support to fish no matter if they make it or not. Like they're still relevant because they have those viewers. And I think it's getting harder and harder to do because there's so many people doing it. I know that you guys had started like a YouTube channel, had camera guys following you around. Did you guys do that last year?
No, we did that one time for the
Yeah,
Toyota
in the
at Grand,
Toyotas.
and
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
we
okay.
just didn't really have the capability or the know how to put it all together. Like none of us are by any means media or editing gurus or know anything about that
Yeah.
to begin with. So we got it all on tape, and to be honest with you, nothing really ever happened with it. It's a hard thing to do to orchestrate all that and a lot of extra pressure. Like and it's something it's kind of required of you now. Maybe not to that extent, but it's to some extent.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's tough. Like I just felt like I needed to learn how to catch them better as opposed to worrying about all that. Now I'm back to the point where I've got to start stepping up my game, or else you get stagnant and you're not going to go anywhere. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely something you got to incorporate, but it's hard, man. It's not an
It
easy
is
thing to
hard, dude.
jump.
It's really time consuming, and if you pay someone to do it for you, it's
Can't
expensive.
afford it.
No,
Yeah, I
it
can't.
costs so much money to have that. And then,
Right.
like you said, like it's so much to deal with by yourself, all the footage, putting it together, and then, like from February when we leave for Rayburn until the end of May, like we're constantly going from tournament to tournament, and that's a lot of footage to keep track of and try to work on in between all that. So I don't know, but then again, like if you look at any company inside the industry, like they're asking, how many followers do you have? Like
Mm-hmm.
they that's what they care about more than anything. They don't necessarily ask you, well, how many, how'd you do in tournaments this year? Like they generally want to know. They want to know what level you're at, but it's about social media because that's how they
Right.
sell.
And we talked about this a little bit before we started, but um, I don't think guys like us can make it as professional anglers without the help of non-endemic local type sponsors. Like you don't just jump into full-on endemic sponsors with the biggest names in the industry. Like there's guys that have been making a living doing this for years and years, and they still are just landing those deals. There was a major one came out on Facebook yesterday. I'm like, how did that guy not already have that deal? And I was like, well, that's there's no way I'm going to get that deal if a guy like that's won hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fishing doesn't have it and still
Right.
has a good social media presence. So, me personally, I lean on more local companies, non-endemic type companies, or smaller within the industry companies that they've made it possible for me to go out and chase my dream. So, super thankful for them. And I think that's something that young people need to be aware of too, that are trying to do this. Like, you got to reach out to people that know you and are willing to support you. And it's definitely it takes time to build the relationships you need to get with those bigger
Mm-hmm.
companies.
Yeah, and I wish more people would talk about that, like the top pros. Like they would explain to these young people like what it takes, and you do have to start off with just local companies that you know and people who are willing to help you, because there's no money, hardly any money to be had in the fishing industry. They're not there's no company that is going to give me any cash right now. You know, the top guys, like, yeah, you might be able to get some of your entry fees paid for. Maybe they pay for some entry fees. But if you're looking to get cash, which is necessary, like you said, like we have to survive, we have to live, and we can't come up with 30 or 40 grand or 50 if we're
Yeah.
fishing the Toyotas. Like, we have to have companies help us do that. And so what we were talking about earlier, like the biggest way that we can help contribute to those is by taking people fishing. I mean, because that's not a luxury that a lot of people have, and especially with a nice boat, nice equipment, someone that knows how to fish and take you to fish, you know. So I think that's one of the biggest things I would tell the people is like reach out to people that you know and try to take them fishing.
Barter, there's other ways to work it other than just asking for money and tell them you're going to post on social media. Like, work for them.
Yeah,
Do whatever you got to do. I just announced
yeah,
today that I signed a new deal with Fitz Fishing here at Lake of the Ozarks, which I'm very, very excited about. And I've been working for them for 3 years. Once a week, I've worked there every Wednesday. If you know, I'm there every Wednesday if I'm not fishing. And mainly, I started doing that because I wanted. Obviously, the discount is nice, and two, I can't tell you the amount of relationships and things that I have formed from working at that tackle shop one day a week. Like, and that turned into a big deal for me. It turned into a big sponsorship that really helps. And it's when I started out, that's not the goal that I had. That's not what I saw
right,
coming. When I started working there, I hadn't even won the Toyota series yet. Like, I had no idea what my path was going to be. It's something that's unfolded in the last few years. And so that was just something that happened out of uh, time, building the relationship and being with them over time, and myself growing as they grew. So there's definitely, if you're a young kid out there trying to land new sponsors or whatever, or be a pro, don't be opposed to just going out there and putting actually some hard work in, or trading or bartering or doing something along those lines. Like Cole said, taking people fishing, or there's a million ways to work it, but you're not going to go land a giant deal with Berkeley because you made a few posts on social media.
mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. It takes a lot of time, and like some of my sponsors, such as Pure Fishing, Berkeley and Abby Garcia, like they sponsored our college team, and then that I was trying to work on for two something years before it actually happened. And so, and I think a lot of people might have the mindset of, I want some money and I'll post on social media, and you know that'll be enough. But like you said, it takes a lot of work. Like, if you really want to be able to make it, like it's almost full-time job to try to satisfy these people. And even if you don't get an even return, like that's what you have to do to try to make it in there sometimes. So it's really difficult. It's not as maybe glorious as it seems sometimes. Like, as little kids watching the professionals, it's like, oh, you make it to that level, and I made it. I'm done. I'm taken care of. But that's not really how it works. You have to really fight for your own personal brand and keep growing it and keep making relationships. And that's really what
Right.
it's all about, is having relationships.
Yeah. I mean, we got kind of sidetracked there, but I mean, that all circles back around and answers the question why I didn't go fish the opens. That's why. There's a million
Yeah.
things that
Yep.
went into it, and it was those decisions where people were, MLF made those changes late in the year. The schedules hadn't came out. All year long, switching and going to the opens was not on my radar. That was nowhere in my brain was I thinking, next year I'm going to change what I'm doing and go fish the opens. Like, I'm trying to get my feet under me, and learn how to be a pro. And no part of me was wanting to leave.
Right.
So all of a sudden that was sprung on us in, like, what, October or something
Yeah.
like that. It was like right around the Toyota Championship, and that was also a huge factor into why I personally didn't make the change. But there's a million reasons why I didn't, and I'm sure the same goes for you.
Yeah, for sure. So besides the invitationals this year, what Toyotas are you fishing?
We've been threatening to fish the Northerns. We are obviously going to fish
Yeah.
we're going to fish the Plains.
Plains.
Yeah, they've been pretty good to us the last few years. I
Yeah.
think like there's only been in the last 2 years there might have been the last 3 years I think there's only one Toyota in the Plains division that Brad or myself wasn't in the top 10. So
Right.
it's worked out. So we're gonna fish those again. I'm not crazy about the schedule. I wish it was flipped around quite a bit, but it is what it is, and we're gonna
Yeah.
try to attack it.
So what's going to make your decision there?
What's that?
You said you're thinking about doing the Northerns Toyotas?
Oh, yeah, that's all going to depend on how much money I made. If I'm struggling, I'm not.
If you can afford it, yeah.
Yeah, no, we've talked about maybe there's a way we might be able to work it where we can stay out east while we're out east and fish a few of those. I think it's like Potomac, Champlain, St. Lawrence. I've never been to St. Lawrence and definitely need to get some time under my belt there as well as Champlain. And to be
Right.
honest, I wouldn't mind having another crack at the Potomac. So I mean, it's really
Yeah.
what has me wanting to do it is an experience thing. Like this year, we were sitting at home all fall after the last tournament, and I'm looking at the results from St. Lawrence and all those going, I'm getting outworked. Like there's all the invitationals guys are at these Toyotas, and I felt like I was getting outworked, and that's what makes me want to do it. But at the end of the day,
Right.
making that giant trek out there, you got to have the funds to do it, and I haven't planned for that for this year. I mean, it's a tight year as far as everything goes, and people aren't wanting to fork out a lot of money, which I don't blame them. So that's what's going to
it costs us a lot more to do everything too. I mean, our boats cost more, travel costs more, living costs more.
Yeah, I mean everything. Everything's a challenge, and that's another thing that we didn't really talk about. But the boat market's a tough deal right now for everybody. I know that's something that I'm personally struggling with. I'm going to run the same boat next year. It's going to have an insane amount of hours on it, but nobody wants to buy boats right now.
Right.
So
And
that's a tough
I think a lot of guys on the invitationals and across the other professional leagues, there's going to be a lot of guys that are going to run the same boats as they did the year before because the prices have gone up on almost every boat, even this year, and they have the past 4 years in a row, it seems like. And interest rates are crazy. No one's wanting to buy boats, and you can't sell your boat either. So it's difficult right now for sure.
So there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, but if the first half of the year is good or the whole year is good and things are going good, then yeah, we're probably going to try to fish some, maybe just one, maybe the whole thing. Something. What do you have to fish for to be wild card eligible?
4, yeah, 4.
Yeah, because
For wild card division.
I mean, dude, it's hard to make the Toyota Championship. But that's not an easy thing. That's not something to take for granted. And going into the last Toyota here, I was on the bubble. I was in 25th. So I was like the two extremes. I got second in one and like 110th in the other one. So
yeah.
it was, I was fretting that I wasn't going to make it. And it was at Table Rock. I'm like, I got to make it there.
Right. And I fished a fourth one as a wild card just for that fact. Like I was like, I can't miss out on one that's in the Ozarks, So I fished one at Dardanelle that was part of the Southwestern division just to make sure I would make it. Yeah, I got 6th. It was pretty good.
Not no big deal.
Which I was excited. I mean, I like Dardanelle. Done decent there over the years. But like you were saying, though, like with fishing more tournaments, I think it goes really hand in hand with it costs more money, but it's going to make me better and probably make me more money. It's like an investment almost. So like, and like you said, a lot of the guys are really good. They fish and they fish and they fish. And that's why they're good is they fish so many tournaments that they're just dialed in, to everything that has to do with fishing. And so I feel like as, fishing the invitationals and fishing one division of the Toyotas, well, I look back at it and I fished 4 Toyotas and made, a little over 20 grand. So that really helped me pay for the rest of my season, even for the invitationals, the Southwesterns this year as well, because, it's going to be 6 Toyotas instead of 4. So it's only 2 more tournaments, but you get that extra chance to make money. You get the extra experience. And I've heard a lot of the pros say that, I think it was Greg Hackney that was saying that whenever he fished the elites and the pro circuit is whenever he did the best. Whenever he fished all those tournaments. He was constantly fishing, but those are the times when he has best angler of the year finishes on both tours because you just it's like practicing every day. Like you have to stay at it to be making the right decisions and having the right mechanics to not lose fish and stuff like that. So it's definitely
look at a guy like John Cox.
Yeah, right. He never stops fishing
Right.
everything.
And anybody that's looked at the MPFL roster for next year, I mean, you can't go but notice. Like, I think there's a couple reasons why this is happening, other than just fishing all the time. But you Kyle Welcher and Zach Burge and Patrick Walters and all these like big time, high profile guys fishing them. I think they see a business opportunity there. But at the same time, I think that they're also wanting to spend more time on the water and fish more big tournaments. That's what makes you who you are, makes you a better angler. And if I hadn't have fished the Toyotas this year, I wouldn't be fishing the Invitationals next year because that supplemented my year. I might have made more fishing. I probably made more fishing Toyotas than I did the Invitationals. If it weren't for that, I gotta say there's no way I'm fishing the Invitationals right now because I'd be dead broke if I'm not already. Like I'd be out. So it's one of those things where it's like one thing leads to another, and you make the right decisions, and you are where you need to be. Right? I mean, everything happens for a reason. So, but definitely going to try to keep fishing as many of those as I can. So, what's the Southwest schedule? Are you fishing the Southwesterns?
Yeah, so the Southwestern starts at Rayburn in February, so it's like 2 weeks after our Invitational. So, not bad. I already get to see the lake and practice for a little bit. And then Toledo Bend at the end of March. So that's when the opens were there this year. So it'll be kind of, probably around that spawn, maybe early post-spawn deal. And then it goes to Eufaula, Oklahoma in May. So not a bad schedule.
No, not at all. That's something to think about. Are you going to stay down there at Rayburn after?
I'm probably going to come back home in that week between just because I think the next 2 or 3 weeks after that will be gone because West Point's right around the 1st of March.
And we have to go straight to Kentucky from West Point, don't we?
Yep, Kentucky Lake. Or maybe West Point's after Kentucky Lake. I don't know, somewhere around in there.
Yeah, for the Plains.
Man, I don't know.
It is nice to have the we kind of get to pre-practice Kentucky and fish Toyota at the same time, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and then the Toyota on Kentucky Lake is right there around March, West Point too. So, that's like, I don't know. I got to be home a little bit, make some money. Can't be away from my wife for 5 weeks in a row. So, you got to keep the balance in check.
For sure.
Although I would love to fish Texas another week. I think that's my favorite state. I haven't spent a whole lot of time fishing down there, but just because that's where my wife Haley's from and her parents have a lake house, and it's got to be my favorite state. And I think you'd love it too. You will love it. Have you fished in Texas at all?
I've been to Rayburn once, but that was during what I like to call my dumbass days. I didn't really have any clue what I was doing back then, and I still did okay. It was flooded, so it's going to be a big change from what I saw last. Like you couldn't even tell there was trees in the place when I was there, but that's the only time I've ever been down there.
And now it's going to be 6 or 7 foot low.
Yeah, which low is better for what we like to do than high. I would say. Yeah, wouldn't you agree?
100%. Might be a little bit more sketchy with the trees and being able to run everywhere, but yeah, I agree. I'd rather have it low than high for sure. Because we definitely have to be up in the grass and bushes and crap. Maybe not the bushes, but shallow grass.
So where is your in-laws' lake house at? What lake is that on?
So it is Lake Cypress Springs. It's about 30 minutes to the east of Lake Fork. So I've gotten to fish Fork some, and it's just a little tiny lake, and they've got a couple little lakes around there. And it's kind of weird because it's all like it's covered in docks with the wooden posts, but there's no brush hardly. There's like nothing on the lake at all, except for there's a couple, and I cannot catch a fish hardly on anything but those tire piles. And like 2 years ago, and it was the January 1st, we had like a 30-pound bag, in an hour sitting on one tire pile. You
Mm.
know, it's just, I don't know. It's kind of like fishing around here, honestly, in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Very
Well,
similar.
I've noticed that a lot of Ozark guys go down to Texas and do pretty good. Like, I don't know if that's something goes hand in hand. I'm worried about a guy like Brad and Brock who fish Truman all the time. Like, I feel like Truman
Mhm.
is a well grooming Texas lake. Like, it's
Yeah, seems like
dirty,
it.
it's
Yeah.
muddy, and it's got lots of timber in it. So that's somewhere I've just started learning how to fish. The last few years, like Truman and I finally started getting along a little bit. But back in the day when we had BFLs there all the time, an absolute grind. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was the tournament you were down in Rayburn for?
I wasn't even there for a tournament. It was you might even know my buddy A Rob. We went with him. That's actually when I met him. And me and Austin Culberton and my two other buddies, his name's Austin. We all went down there for a trip that just a fun trip down at Rayburn. I think it was in like April or something like that. And it was just a trip to get out there. Let me think. What boat did I have? It was that blue and white Champion. I still have that boat. That's the boat I went down there in. So I was even using an old used boat when I went down there, long time
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
Got
You
some good
fished
stories from that there.
Did you fished in college, right?
Yeah, like 2 semesters. I wasn't really
Two
cut out for
semesters, so
college.
just a handful of tournaments.
Yeah. The first time I think it's the first time I ever caught 20 pounds in my life was in a college tournament at Kentucky Lake on an A rig.
No
We
crap.
drove through the night from college to Kentucky Lake, put the boat in, caught 20 pounds in practice, and like I'm not even kidding you, like probably 2 hours. Never even hardly ran around. Didn't know what I was doing. Had hardly fished any tournaments. Put the boat back on the trailer. Didn't practice anymore. I'm like, I'm on them. Put it back on the trailer. Caught 21-8. 21-8 the first day, and we were in 8th place.
No
So
crap.
it was before the carp, right before the carp, so it's still good.
Hmm.
And yeah, we fell on our face the second day, and that was my first like rude awakening. I didn't start fishing tournaments until even like real tournaments till after that time frame. I was 20 years old before I started fishing tournaments really.
Really?
Hmm.
So and how old are you now?
I'll be 30 this year.
Dang, getting
Yeah.
old.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm up there. It happens quick, but not. I would say still yet like the first 6 years or so of my career was all just learning lessons, like taking my bruises and like not really getting much accomplished, not really learning much, just being out there and learning how to lose. It wasn't
Right.
until the last few years that things started coming together. Like there was a lot of hard lessons learned out there. I didn't have any mentors or anything growing up. Nobody in my family fished bass tournaments, just learned to fish from the bank. So I spent a lot of time in a tackle shop. That's kind of what got me started. I started working at a local store here and then worked at Bass Pro in Columbia and then worked at Fitz's. And so I've been in a tackle shop a lot, but yeah, pretty much everything's self-taught, self-learned, or you learn from YouTube and tournament videos. But yeah, it was a hard go for a while.
Right. So over these past 10 years, I mean, it takes a lot of mental thought, and a lot of the guys that I think are at the top consistently mentally, like someone who blows my mind is Jacob Wheeler. Like he just looks like he catches fish, but the way he attacks the game mentally is insane. And talking with like Keith Carson recently, I got to know him more this past year. Like he is mentally dialed in all aspects of his life, but like it's about constantly learning and making your life better. Like you're trying to fix things, right? You're trying to be better as a person. You're trying to like dial down mentally. How do I get better at fishing? So like, what are some of the biggest things mentally that you've learned the
Well,
past 10 years or that you apply?
like you touched on a lot of how you get to that winning mentality, that winning state happens off the water, right? Like it's between your ears, and it's your relationships with your family. It's your off the water life leads to things that happen on the water and how you deal with tough situations and tough tournaments and things like that. And that's something that I've personally been fighting through like the last year or so, like just trying to grow as a person and change some things off the water I'm hoping are gonna equate to more success on the water, or at least being able to handle situations properly or see more clearly. So there's a lot to be said for growing yourself personally and trying to become a better person and get a better hold on life and do things like that I think will equate to more success on the water. So I feel a lot better this year going into it. I've told a couple people that it just feels different. I feel different. I feel like I'm in a better place mentally. And so I'm hoping that's going to equate, that's going to show itself on the water. It might not, you never know, but I can tell you one thing, I don't regret like doing what I've done and trying to grow the way I have and work on that type of thing. So it's something that you don't want to shy away from. It's, it needs to be talked about more. And I certainly respect a guy like Gerald Swindle who will go out of his way to talk about things that most other people don't want to talk about in tournament fishing or whatever, life in general. But definitely, there's a million different ways you can do it, and everybody has their own path as far as is growing yourself. Dude, I got a baby sitting right here in the bed. I can't believe she hadn't started screaming yet. So you're good. But that's
Yeah.
that's kind of where I stand on that.
So, yeah, and I agree with all that. So, like, what do you do? I think sometimes, like for me, times where you're not catching them, you have a bad mindset. Maybe you just had a bad tournament, or 2 days of practice has gone by and you haven't found nothing, and you're like, man, this sucks. I don't want to be here anymore. Like, what do you do in those situations, or how do you keep a good mental state? Because it takes an hour to find something in practice really good, or in the tournament, like making a decision. But I think it's important, and I got to see that in college a lot. A lot of guys would just give up. Like there'd be 5 or 6 boat tied up in the middle of the lake, and they're just chilling because it's noon and they haven't caught a fish yet. And it can come down to the last cast a lot of times. So the mentality is a huge factor in like being relentless, as you're out there. And that type of mentality is how you find more fish, how you know, rise above everyone else. So like what do you do in those situations when it's just tough? I mean,
The more I fish and as I get older and the more I'm out there on the water, the less that stuff bothers me. It in the tournament is when I have the most trouble. Like if I had good practice and I'm in the tournament and things aren't going right, like I can feel that 400-pound gorilla, like G always talks about. Like that's that's what I have to fix. But like having a tough practice, man, that's the best normally that's when I do the best. The Toyota that I won here was like one of the most terrible adverse conditions that anybody had ever seen. Like people were saying you weren't going to catch any bass. They wouldn't bite an A-rig, things like that. And then my second best finish ever was at Grand last year. You know as well as anybody how tough and terrible it was out there. The conditions were terrible. Practice was terrible. I didn't
didn't
catch
get above
crap.
freezing on the last day.
No, I mean it was all miserable, and I was on nothing, like nothing going into that tournament, and I just kept learning as I went, and putting the trolling motor down and forcing myself to fish and like look for new stuff, and that's the easy part to me. The hard part is when I feel like I'm on something, or I feel like I have to do well, or something like that, and I'm in the tournament and it's not working in the tournament. That's when it's tough, and that's something I'm still working on. Like I'm working on things like that can help me get through those situations, like controlled breathing and meditation and like Rick Clunn type stuff that is going to help take you
Yeah.
to a place where you can fight through those tough battles. You know what I mean? Like that's tough, and it's always going to be tough. I don't think that's ever going to get easier, but it may get easier, but it won't go away. So that's an ever changing, ever evolving process that I'm working on constantly. But as far as like having tough practices and lakes fishing tough and like knowing the tournament's going to be tough, I thrive in those situations. Like that's what I like. But I don't like when I'm not catching them in the tournament, or like I thought something was gonna work and the plan goes awry. That's when I personally struggle. So I don't know. It's something I'm working on. I don't really have a good answer for it, but I mean, what do you think? How do you break that down?
Well, I agree that like one of the hardest things to do is learning how to change and basically bail out on what you've what you found and like look for something new, because it's like safety and comfort. Or it's even like a spot that you know that there's fish here, like you had at Potomac. Wait, where did you say that was? That yeah,
That was
Potomac,
Potomac.
where you like had 3-pounders that were biting left and right, and then there were little bitty ones, you know. And then it's like, okay, at what point do I need to leave and find something new? But it's unknown. Like I don't know if there's even going to be any fish there, and just hope that it changes, or hope that I, you know, catch a big fish. And I think that's one of the biggest things that people struggle with in tournament fishing. And a good example of being able to see the importance of this is Kim Van Dam when they're at Saginaw Bay this year. You know, the final day he was fishing around, fishing kind of his largemouth stuff when he, you know, knows he needed to be catching smallmouth, and he's like, I could stay here, but I would be, you know, I would be losing on purpose. Essentially, I would be giving up if I stayed here and tried to catch these fish. Like I have to go try to find something else, or you know, make something happen. So I think that's definitely one of the biggest things. And you know, you just have to like keep grinding at it. Like you got to keep looking. And so here's something really interesting that I think that, you know, a lot of people should hear is that whenever I was talking to Keith Carson on one of the last podcasts,
I
he
watched it.
said that every year you did, yeah, every year he picks a thing to work on, and his most beneficial one was bailing.
Scrapping
And
it,
so
bailing. Yeah.
scrapping it, yeah. And I was talking to him about, so he won an NPFL right Patman a couple years ago, and he said that he was catching fish around, and day 2 of the tournament, like he smashed him. Day 1 was leading, and to start day 2, he didn't even start on those islands. Like the wind was just blowing into a little creek or a bay, and he went in there and smashed him again. And it was just because like the conditions changed, the winds, you know, shifted directions, and he's like, that's where I think I need to go. You know, like I don't need to waste any time on this other stuff, even though he caught, you know, 20 something pound bag there. So I think the further you can get ahead on bailing and following your instincts and finding new water, the further ahead you're going to be of everyone else. But it's the hardest thing to do. It is definitely one of the hardest things to do. Like you said, when you found fish, or you know fish should be somewhere. And I think it's hardest on probably like the Ozarks for you, because it's really tough for me on Table Rock. Like I know where the fish live a lot of times. I know how big they are, and I could just sit there and like, I just want them to bite. I just need to catch one of these fish, you know, and I'd be good.
Right.
But you know,
Well,
you could go to another spot 10 miles down the lake, and first cast in there you catch a 5-pounder. Like there's always
right.
those fish out there, and that's what I always have to tell myself.
Yeah. Well, you said something when you brought up Kevin Van Dam that sparked something in my mind. And I've seen the clip. You've seen the clip. Everybody's seen it. The clip of him, I think it's at Toledo Bend. It might even be the tournament where he got the hook in his hand, where he jumps off like 4 or 5 giants in a row. And he just like looks at the cameras like that don't happen often. He fires back out there. And those are the things that don't really bother me that much, because those are uncontrollable things, right? So you're at a tough lake and the fishing's tough. That's uncontrollable. The weather sucks. That's uncontrollable. You know, you lose a fish of the boat. That's uncontrollable. It's the controllables that I struggle with, right? Like it's your decision making where you're choosing to do something or another.
Yep.
And that's where I fight my mental battles. Like where, like you said, do I pull the plug? Do I scrap it? Do I bail? Do I go throw, go run to the other end of the lake? Things like that. Or I know they're here and I can't get them to bite. Like these are the winning fish. Those are the mental struggles that I deal with a lot. But the uncontrollable stuff is the easiest stuff to let go and to not let bother you, in my opinion. Like that was
Right.
the first thing I learned how
Mm-hmm.
to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I've had that's making me think. Lately, I've had tournaments, especially on Table Rock. I think the Toyota Championship I did this, where I'm like, okay, I know I have to move to go find some fish, and I drive down the lake, and I'll drive for a couple minutes, and I'll make up my mind on what I want to do or where I want to go. It's like that is the hardest decision for me to make while I'm out there. Anywhere we go, like, you know, thing that stresses me out is making decisions,
Because you have to
because
hold yourself accountable if you make the wrong decision. It's on you. It's not fate that something happened. You did it.
exactly.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, exactly. But you never know. Like I could go, you know, I got these 2 creeks, say at Table Rock, there's bait, you know. There could be 0 fish in either of them. There could be 20 pounds waiting in both of them. You don't know. You know, it's really hard to say you're making the right decision. Now, I think one of the worst things to do is second guess your decisions, which something that I'm going to try to be better at this year is like if my instincts tell me something, I'm going to try to do it right away. Like I thought of it for a reason, and like the times when I think, oh, should I go here? Should I go here? And I'm second guessing it. I think that's, whenever things can go bad, and you don't make the right decisions, like following your instincts because like your 10 years of tournament fishing or, however many days on the water that we've spent, like we learn something every day. And our instincts are a accumulation of all that stuff trying to tell us, where the fish should be or what we should know. So try to work on this year because it's definitely one of the most difficult things, I think.
That's cool. Yeah, for sure. I agree.
Yeah. So, and like, dude, like the Ozarks, we got to talk about that now.
Yeah,
because
let's do it.
The problem for me is maybe it's because I haven't spent near as much time on Lake the Ozarks because I just dislike it, and you can't even fish it in the summer really because it's so bad. But dude, I've had so many times where I've gone out and caught fish, and I'm like, oh yeah, I finally got it figured out, and then I go out the next day and I don't catch anything. I catch nothing. I catch like the skinniest 15 inches that I could possibly find. I found them. So
I feel the same way about
Table Rock. Okay, well, we got to figure something out here because, like on Table Rock, I think that for me, it's you have to keep moving till you find them because Table Rock, it doesn't matter what time of year, they're going to be in areas where other fish are. And I don't know if that's because maybe in the winter, those fish move in giant groups so much that, in the spring, hey, like this is where we ended up. This is where we're going to spawn. I don't know exactly, but at the same time, in the same deal, you just got to keep moving because they're out there somewhere. There's a big school waiting to be caught somewhere. Like you just have to keep moving. And for me, it's about hitting a lot of targets, and a lot of them are suspended, and that's what makes it difficult. But like on Lake the Ozarks, I don't think you catch as many fish in a day, or I don't anyway, as I do on Table Rock. And maybe that's because there's the lack of species as well. There's 3 species to be caught, so you can catch more fish. But it's harder for me to dial that in on Lake of the Ozarks.
Well, as far as catching a lot of fish goes, I don't know what the number is, but like if I have days where I don't catch like 30 fish, I'm pissed. Like 30, I've gotten accustomed to catching a lot of fish. Now that's wintertime and summertime. You're not going to do that in October or September or whatever. But it seems like when I do, what my biggest strengths are when I can go through a lot of fish. Like I'm not drag a jig and catch five fish that weigh 20 pounds guy. I'm a numbers guy, and I like to get feedback and see them. So to me, the biggest key is being around a lot of them and trying to be around as many of them as you can. And Ozarks, you said like the fish at Table Rock maybe are so pelagic that it's a little more random as to where they end up every year. Whereas Ozarks is very, very historical, I think, a lot of times. Like wintertime banks, summertime spots, as long as the conditions are similar, like your watercolor is the same or similar as to what it was the year before. Like we don't have big, massive fluctuations in the water. Like this lake can't flood. And it doesn't, it's never more than like a 4 or 5 foot swing throughout the course of a year. And it's never over pool. So the fish know, they seem to have it in their head, like where they want to be certain times a year. Like the banks or the spots that I catch fish off of in the wintertime, as long as the conditions are similar, I can tell you right now, I'm going to go there and catch them. Like they're there. So that's definitely something to be said. Like, and they do have tendency to like show themselves on your sonar one day and not show themselves the other. And a lot of that's probably pressure and things like that. But knowing where they get and just having the confidence to know they're there is a lot of it. And like I just am very confident that I know.
So do you think it's about covering water and just learning the lake more than, because I mean that's what it seems like.
Yeah, I mean I fished a lot of this lake. I don't want to say I fished the whole lake, but my boat has been in every creek on this whole entire lake, and it's a massive place. But still, yet like this year, the last couple weeks, every time I've went out, I've fished stuff that I've never fished before, or at least something that I'm looking at through a completely different lens. And a lot of the fish here don't show themselves on your sonar until they're interacting with a bait. Like either they're coming off the bank or they're coming off the bottom, and there's no way to tell that they were there until you put something in front of them to make them, interact with it. As to where a lot of the time,
So do you
table
ever
rock, you see them.
right? It's like opposite. Yeah, you see them. So do you ever see suspended bass?
Oh yeah,
Hardly.
this year in the summertime, I did really well fishing for fish that probably shouldn't even say this, but fishing for fish that were up off the bottom on spots that normally, because we had no current, and so they floated a lot more this year. They were still around the spots that they normally would be when there's current moving, and I was catching them just by targeting them and seeing them up. But they may be over 40 foot of water, but only 5 foot down. Like they're floating. And so people were saying that they weren't there or they couldn't catch them. They weren't on their summer spots because they didn't have any current. Well, they just weren't on the bottom.
Right.
So they definitely will float around. And then like the days here in the wintertime when they sit up high in the brush pile, that's the days when everybody finds them or catches them. Like you can definitely tell, like one day they'll be at the bottom of the pile and one day they'll be at the top. And if they're at the bottom, they're super hard to see, or you maybe not even be able to see them at all. But if if you're out there on the right day and they're floating up high in the brush or whatever, or in the water column, that's when you can kind of take they're definitely wanting to be in, and it's probably going to be good forever and ever.
So during the wintertime, are you throwing to mainly targets? Or are you fishing mainly banks where you know there's fish, or a lot of both?
It's both, and they happen at different times. So like there's a time when they're on the bank and there's a time when they're not on the bank. That's all I'm going to give you.
So that's all winter though.
Yeah. Well, like it seems like they start on one and then transition to the other. You can figure it out.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
So
you won a tournament with like what 21 pounds like 1, 2, 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that was it was I had 21 something. Yeah, it was the Angry Pirate. I'm 4 for 4 in the last four little throw togethers. Now there's only been like 40 boats combined between the 4 tournaments, but it's paid pretty good.
Yeah, that's good. So I mean, what's the fishing been like? I mean, are they like full winter time yet, or are you in like a transition?
No. Yeah, no, it's definitely like what I would call an early winter pattern. A lot of fish not showing themselves, not really many structure fish. And the fishing's really not that good. I've just been covering a lot of water, like putting the trolling motor down and being bullheaded with what I'm doing and where I'm doing it and just fishing. I've actually, all of them have been won in different parts of the lake, all 4 of them.
Really? So I mean, what makes that decision to go to those different parts of the lake? Is it conditions?
Yeah, kind of conditions, kind of just
places.
Well, a lot of that. Like I won one of them in the gravelway. I won one of them in the glaze. I won one what we called like the B stretch, which is like the Shawnee Bend stretch. And I won one up like the Pantera area. And it's just like a kind of a gut thing, kind of I'm bored with this part of the lake thing, or like not seeing it. Like I still did good. Like I still ended up having a good day at the end of the day, but it wasn't exactly how I thought it should be. So it's just like a constant evolution and feedback from being out there and just covering a lot of water. And it's no secret. I mean, I won all 4 of them on an 8 rig. I never caught another fish on anything else. It's like,
did you hardly throw anything else?
No, I made like 3 casts with a jerk bait in the last one and caught a crappie, and that was it. And but like
you're like,
the thing is, like, I could have caught them on an A rig or on a jerk bait, but I can't cover near as much water. Like I can just cover so much more water with the A rig. One of the days, I swore I actually didn't even have all I had was like an A rig set up. I was really unprepared. I'd been doing something like the 3 days before the tournament and just showed up that morning. Had to rig I had to borrow an A rig and rig one up. Like I had nothing. And that day I was frustrated because I felt like I could have caught him better on a jerkbait, and I just wasn't prepared for it. But in my mind, like here especially, if you can throw an A-rig and you know like they will bite it, you probably need to be throwing it. Like if it's below 50 degrees or even like 55 or below it, and if I go out in the day and I catch a couple, like see them chase it or try to hit it, then that's what I'm going to do. Like that's how it's going to like it may not get won that way, but if I'm going to win, it's probably going to be like that. Now, I love jerkbait fishing. Don't get me wrong. It's literally, if I could choose any way, like my favorite way to catch them is on a jerkbait. I absolutely love throwing a jerkbait in the wintertime. That's why I love the Bass and Bobs so much, because I know nobody's going to go beat me with an A-rig.
Right. Yeah. Because they can't throw the A-rig, right, in that tournament.
Right. No A-rig in that tournament. So guess what? We throw one bait. We throw a jerkbait. Like we may have 6 of them or 8 of them laid out, but we're going jerkbait fishing, and I love jerkbait fishing. And there's days where it will by far outshine the A-rig. But to me, like I can just cover so much more water by the end of the day. It's an easy thing for me to be out there, and if I'm catching them slow or they're not eating it, like people put it down because they're hammering it and they won't get hooked. They're doing that like crazy right now, just blowing through it. But I just know that if I don't lay it down and I keep my trolling motor moving and I keep putting it in front of fish, by the end of the day, I'm going to catch 5 good ones.
So whenever you have times like that, like you said, they're just blowing through the A-rig and it's, a lot of them don't bite. Do you ever like slow down and fish that same area or stretch with a jerkbait? Or do you just keep moving? Because the reason I ask that is because like on Table Rock, there's a lot of suspended fish, and I give them like 1 or maybe 2 casts, and if they follow it once and they get right on it, or they're not interested, I move on to the next fish because there's enough fish out there that you can get it in front of one that's going to eat. So trying to figure out how that relates.
No, lately that's the approach I've been taking too. Like if they're your first chance at one's your best opportunity at one, unless they like keep making multiple efforts to eat it. I've caught a lot of fish recently actually by making multiple presentations, but it's not because they're not. I mean, like that they're hitting it on every cast type thing. Like I'll throw at them until they act like they don't want it anymore, and then I'm gonna keep going. I'm not going back and forth with the A-rig. Now, if it's a jerkbait tournament or like, especially in a jerkbait tournament, I'll go back and forth and keep hitting a spot multiple times or revisit it multiple times. And I may revisit a spot with the A-rig in a tournament if like I saw big ones or like thought I saw a giant or something like that. But for the most part, I'm giving them one shot and I'm going to keep going. Like, I'm just going to keep going until I run into the right number of them that are going to actually commit to it and eat it. So same type of thing that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I like a jerkbait so much is you can make a little difference and just barely get them to come up and eat it, But like on Table Rock during the winter, I feel like it's even irrelevant to throw an A-rig or a jerkbait anymore.
Yeah.
Because there's so many schools of fish moving around out there. And it makes it difficult to tournament fish too, because it's almost about who spends more time on the water. Like if you don't get a chance to practice and find fish, then that's all you're doing during the tournament. Like is just idling around trying to find a group of fish. And if they're not, largemouth, then they're not thrown. So I don't know. It's pretty difficult because there's going to be a school of big ones out there somewhere, but it's really hard to beat that. Trying to fish a jerkbait or an A-rig. Like you can have some good days for sure. And in recent tournaments, guys have had good days throwing rock crawler or jerkbait or an A-rig whenever we have some conditions. But there's just so many fish out there deep that
but if
it's hard to beat. It's hard to beat the guys.
If you're Demikian or ice jigging or whatever, like it's more like pick your prey type situation, right? Like you can put it in front of this, the exact fish that you want. I haven't ever really done it much. I really need to get down there and do it, like because I need to do it to help hone my skills, because that's something I really wanted to do a lot. But to be honest with you, have a really hard time leaving here to go to Table Rock in the wintertime. Like you roll out of bed to catch 15 pounds. It's hard to go somewhere else,
Yeah.
But I don't have much experience doing it, and it bit me at the Toyota Championship. I wasn't trying to do that. I got around in one of the good areas. I think that a lot of guys ended up catching them out on bait, but they weren't doing it great. And the day I found it was like really early in the morning, and I was super excited to get out there. And I just kind of looked at him for a little bit, threw at him, didn't catch him, and went to the bank. But dude, just on a little side note, I really felt like I was on. I don't know about the winning fish, but the fish to do really good in that tournament. But they were smallmouth. But I could point to you on a map and tell you everywhere there was going to be a school of smallmouth, and I was around a lot of them, dude. And I couldn't get them to bite anything. Like I couldn't get them to commit to
During the
stuff.
tournament, you couldn't.
And
because it was the conditions.
yeah, like I was wrecking them in practice, dude. Wrecking them. I caught doubles on an A rig like 4 different times.
Really?
Smallies, yeah. At one point,
So how big were these schools of smallmouth?
oh, dude, stupid. Like hundreds, big.
Really?
Like at least 50 in every spot I'd go to, and
Well, that's
and I could
insane.
see them. They were on the bottom and they were shallow, really shallow. And even in the tournament, I could see them up there, and I couldn't get them to bite anything. Like at one point in the tournament or in practice, I had thrown an A rig to this spot, got clobbered by a smallmouth. It got hooked on a stump, and whenever I reeled it up, I got the fish, and there was other smallmouth with it. They had pulled both the teasers off the A rig, and another fish had pulled it off the other one off the stump, like loaded. I just couldn't get them to bite, and it was similar to how the guy that won, I think, was fishing. Some of them were relating to the trees and stuff, but they were shallow, and it was a lot of pocket oriented stuff. And like just some bad luck. My co-angler railed him on the second day. Like he caught a 3-something pound smallmouth when he was trying to jab the bait out of the rocks with his rod tip on a single swim bait. He's like
what?
Poking at like literally reeled all the way down to it, jabbing it out of the rocks, and goes, "Oh gosh, I got one!" And it's like a 3.5 some pound. Ate it. I mean, he was hung, and it ate it off the bottom with us sitting right there.
That's crazy.
It. Yeah, just crazy stuff like that. And it was just a weird deal, but it was super frustrating that I couldn't get him to bite. But that's what kept me.
Did you
from
try
doing
some
that.
like really finesse stuff out of them?
Oh yeah, everything. I tried everything. I like tiny little Ned rigs and just I can't even remember. I'm trying to think, but like they would need a little. Yeah, they would need a little Kitech, and they were kind of too shallow. Like probably could have like hover strolled them, but that wasn't something that I've really done much yet.
To him, probably.
Yeah, I wasn't savvy on the hover strolling yet, but I've been thinking about it.
So, what were they relating to? I mean, like what made you be able to tell where those fish were at?
I guess it's kind of a drain. It was kind of like a drain thing. I think like it's just like anywhere there was some gravel when it would it's typical smallmouth. Like they were wanting to be on the gravel, and it seemed like it ended up being pocket type oriented stuff, like pretty much any pocket you went to for the most part. Like,
so was it like close to the main lake?
Yeah, real close to the main lake. Yeah.
So were they like, because I catch a lot of fish there fishing like the timber, like in those pockets that are close to the main lake, but like, is that where you catch them? Were you like towards the back or?
Yeah, the backs, like in the very corners, like in the very back corners. Really? Yeah. And if there was timber there, it helped, but they were at the base of it. They weren't up, like up in it. I did have
that's typically like.
I was gonna say I had a giant. My co-angler saw it. I didn't get to see it. He said it's the biggest smallmouth he's ever seen in his life. Hit a big glide. That I was watching it on the scope, and like it was just a weird situation. But he's like, my co-angler goes, "Oh, dude, he's got it!" And so I naturally went like this and didn't catch it. Where I think if I wouldn't have done that, if he wouldn't have said that, I probably would have caught it. But he said it had he said he saw it sideways in its mouth. So I mean, what are you gonna do?
Way, gosh.
Oh dude. Yeah, out of a tree, crazy. Suspended in a tree, and where I saw it in the morning, I think it followed a rig or followed a rig or something, and I saw it in the morning. I'm like, I'm coming back and catching you later. Literally came back at the end of the day, made the perfect decision. Like, I'm going to go catch that giant. I thought it was a largemouth. I'm like, I'm going to go catch that giant. Throw over there, one cast, comes out, clobbers it right at the boat. Or no, what happened was I had the glide almost to the boat, and I was watching it on scope and knew that it was right there. And it must have tried to eat it because like this big surface disturbance, like it splashed, but I never felt a thing. Like it was like nothing touched it. But I'm looking at the scope and the sun's shining in my face, and I hear it splash, but didn't see anything happen. So I didn't really do anything. And then I like twitched it one more time, and that's when my co-anger's like, "Dude, he's got it!" And I set the hook and missed it, and it was.
You're just too excited about the whole situation.
Yeah, I definitely would have got paid if I'd have caught that one. I think if I remember right, I barely missed a check.
Oh, did you really? What was your weight for 2 days?
It was like 11 and 11 or something, all smallmouth.
Yeah. Dude, that's crazy. That sounds like a blast though. I think if we would have had like that cloudy, rainy, windy weather that we would have had in practice, then you would have smashed him probably. But it just got like calm and sunny. And with them fish being shallow, it's just hard to get them to bite.
Yeah. Looking at the highlights, it looked like that guy won, similar to how I was fishing, but he was fishing the same pattern, but it looked like more tree oriented, and he was just somehow getting him to bite. I know he's throwing that little jig with a Ned rig, but I mean, I threw a little Dirk's jig and stuff at him and couldn't get him to bite.
Right. I feel like he was probably fishing where more people, like he had more water to himself, I think. And so, this first time that those fish see a bait, it's way easier to catch them. So I'm assuming you're fishing down lake, Kimberly City to the dam.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even go past Indian. Like I was getting jacked by guys. I mean, there's guys everywhere. That definitely didn't help.
No,
but after seeing what I saw in practice, I was like, I got
hard to do anything else. Yeah. That's a tough tournament too because, like, the dam is like phenomenal that time of year, but the thing that sucks too is like that tournament taken out in State Park. Just there's so many boats around, so.
Yeah, if it would have been a Kimberling City, tournament, it might have been a little different.
Yeah, it would have been a lot better probably. So I had a problem, dude. I was running around every day. I found fish every day of the tournament and just caught new fish.
So were they getting on bait as the tournament went, like because of that cold front, or?
No, they were already on bait, and I found a decent amount of fish in practice. Nothing crazy, but the fish that I had found were all gone. That or they turned into like little bitty ones, and there just wasn't as many. And so, like the first day, it took me a while. And like right at the end of the day, I was fishing like around Cow Creek and found some bait on the main lake and cold under 12. And then the second day, I'm like, so I ran up the White River on day one. I'm like, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to stay down lake and fish Cow Creek to Indian Point. And I ended up finding fish around Indian Point. And I didn't practice, but there were so many people down there, fishing out in the middle of the creeks and stuff. But it was actually between the dam and Indian Point. I just found some bait, and there was smallmouth floating around. There was a school of like 20 fish that I would go up to this point, and this school of fish would like follow my boat, and I would just drift back and try to catch them, and they would never follow anything. And finally, I threw a little hair jig to them, and one of them just came up and ate it, and it was like a 3-pound largemouth. So this big school of largemouth just kept following my boat around, and then on that same stretch, I was in 40 foot of water or 35, and there was this big dot sitting on top of a stump. And I'm like, there's no way that's a bass, but I'm going to throw to it for sure. And I threw a jig to it, and it sank right next to him, and he followed it straight down and ate it. And it was like a 3 3/4, 4-pounder, but it had like a 5-pound head, So I thought it was a giant. And then the third day, I started in that same area, and there was a bunch of fish around, and then I went across. I didn't catch them in before, and I caught 12.5 pounds of smallmouth like 3 or 4 times.
What day was it that you were around Brad? Because I think
that was day 3.
You made Brad question his entire existence. He said that you put on an absolute clinic, and he could not catch a bass. He's like, I saw him throw back 12 pounds 6 times, and I couldn't. So
what happened is there was a ton of bait in this creek, and there was fish floating everywhere, but there were schools of largemouth swimming around, and they were deep. I mean, they were like 60, 80 foot, and they were not around bait. I mean, all the bait was at the surface, and I was just chasing around these schools and throwing the new Picasso ice jig to them, and dude, I was catching every time I threw in there. I was catching one of them, and I caught like one that was over 3, but all the rest of them were like 2.5, 2 3/4. And yeah, like you said, I caught several 12.5 pound limits of largemouth. And then I went across the creek and caught several 12.5 pound limits of smallmouth. I don't even know how many fish I caught in that day, but it was just, I literally didn't leave that little area all day because I was just catching all day long. And I had like 15.5 good because like the largemouth weren't schooled up yet. Like they were still spread out, in like their fall deal. And so like I went in pre-practice and I caught several 4 to 5 pounders largemouth that were schooled up, like in schools of like, 20 or 30. But then in the tournament, I couldn't find that, and everyone was catching spots in smallmouth, and that's why the weights were kind of a little bit lower than I thought they were going to be.
Yeah, look, I was surprised how many how many spots were getting weighed in, like by guys that were doing good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's because the spots in the smallmouth is what, like, largemouth didn't hardly play. Like, I weighed, I don't know, maybe half my fish were largemouth or a little under half, but a lot of guys were not catching largemouth. And that was the reason why. Because those spots get so fat they weigh decent.
Yeah, I did get on that dock deal pretty good, but I couldn't get myself to leave the smallies. Like every time I went to a big dock, like I could catch them off those docks, just drop shotting and stuff. But I just couldn't get myself to leave those smallmouth because I knew what was there, and I don't know, I couldn't get myself to leave it.
Yeah, and I think those become a popular thing, like fishing a football jig, flipping them into the stalls, 15 to 45 foot deep. I think if you could take the weight from all the fish under docks, you'd have mega bags every day. But it's just they get fish so much, and it's really hard to get them to bite.
It's hard to get them to follow it even.
Oh yeah, I mean they'll follow everything down. You could I would skip a Demiki right under there and get them to follow it out, but. I caught some spots, and a couple little largemouth, but they just get. I think they're just so pressured.
Were you seeing a giant bag every day? Because I definitely was. Like under those docks, I could see giant bags.
Yeah, and I fished it a lot on day one, and that's why I struggled most of the days because I wasn't around active fish. I was trying to catch those big ones, and it was just impossible, dude. I mean, some days they'll bite. And some, a lot of the time they don't. And so I dock fished every day a little bit, because I know it's there, but it's just hard to get them to bite. And I think that's where a lot of those largemouth are.
They gotta be. I mean, they're largemouth.
Yeah, it's normal of them.
Right, but I don't know. Definitely would like to get some revenge on that tournament. I was upset with it. Just felt like once again I was on them. I just couldn't get it all to come together. Not great decision making. My fish were too pressured, but it's hard when you see them.
Right. I mean that's how it goes though. I mean different conditions and maybe they would have bit and you would have smashed them. It's hard to say.
But I was mad at myself for not getting on the bait deal. But like I looked a lot. And like I said, I've never really done it that much. And I found a lot of bait, but I couldn't find fish on the bait.
Right. It was weird. It was crazy because I don't know what made this happen. The water temperature was warmer than normal. Plus, the lake was low and coming down, which is really low now. But there was so much bait on the main lake, and there was absolutely like almost zero in the creeks. There was like a little bit here and there, and that's usually when it's good is when the bait is in the creeks because they're more confined, and that's where you find the fish. But a lot of the bait was on the main lake, and so it was so hard to like find those fish and stay with them. And like you said, like maybe some of the little pockets closer to the main lake would have them, but I think that's why another reason it was like a tough return weight in is because I've never seen it where it's that, I don't want to say difficult, but where there's that many fish that aren't in creeks. And like Drew, he ended up getting third. he literally caught all of his fish in the main river channel, just around bait. He would just graph around, find some bait, fish it.
Well,
And
that's what I was gonna ask. Like, I noticed something crazy in that tournament when I was looking for that bait. Like, you could be in 100 feet of water, right, idling or looking with your trolling motor, whatever you're doing, and you're coming up to the channel, and it's 100 feet here and 120 feet in the channel. Nothing, 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 nothing. Get to the edge of that channel, bait. How does the bait know that they're sitting over that channel? Do they like? I don't get it. Like, even if they're 5 feet down, they will be right on the edge of that break that's 100 feet below the surface. Like, they feel it somehow.
they
but
do
I don't
that.
understand.
No, they always do that, and they'll get chased off of it. And I think that's what pushes them out of that channel more than anything is when they get chased. But they do. They relate to the dead center of the channel 90% of the time. And
Right.
I don't know why whenever they're up higher. I mean, it makes sense when they're down there closer to the bottom, because they have, it's like it's something to
feel it.
follow.
Yeah.
It's like a road, right? But when they're up higher like that, they still do, and I don't know why. I don't
understand how they can tell that they're over the channel like that.
Yeah, I know.
It was weird, but yeah, that's where I was finding I found a ton of that bait around that Cow Creek bend down there, and that's where the only place I saw fish on bait the whole week, and I just ignorantly overlooked it. I think if I would have stuck with it a while, I probably would have found some fish. But I definitely saw some, but it was just short lived, and I didn't give it the time I should have.
Yeah, well, I think you should get used to chasing bait because I think that just about every Toyota Series championship that we have from here on out will be bait oriented, because it's always that October, November, and they're around bait like Gunnersville last year. Most of the top 10 chasing bait. This year Table Rock was obvious, but like even next year we're going to the Tennessee River, and I guarantee that's all it's going to be. It could be on the main river, it could be in creeks. But that's what's gonna dominate the top 10, I think.
That's certainly a skill that I need to hone in on for sure.
Yeah, a little bit easier when they're not as deep as Table Rock, though. Table Rock's a difficult place. I mean, I caught fish back in creeks, I caught fish up the river, and I caught fish literally on the main channel around Indian Point. Like, there were some trees that were like 100 feet deep, but the channel is like, 200 feet deep, and they were just up off the channel in these trees. And there was bait everywhere swimming around. And I think it just makes it difficult because they get so spread out. Like, those fish have so much water volume that they could be in, it just takes forever to find them.
Yeah, it's hard to hit them too in 100 foot of water. Like, it's hard to hit.
Oh, it is. Yeah, they move so fast.
So, I don't know. I definitely need to get down there, though, and work on it for sure.
Yep. Well, dude, we covered a lot of good stuff today. Thanks for talking to me for an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah, no problem. I like doing these. I've been, like I said, I reached out. I wanted to get you on this deal anyway. So, thanks for having me. And anytime you want
I think we definitely, I think we should definitely do some more as the season goes on, and concepts that we're talking about, because it'll change throughout this year, and as we get to fish these tournaments that we think we're excited about, we'll see how that actually goes.
Yeah, exactly. That'll probably be completely opposite of what we think, but
that's typically how it is.
So no, we should do some out on the road or something like that. Maybe that'd be fun if we can figure out a way to do it. But I like doing it. So I appreciate you having me, and anytime you need somebody on, hit me up.
All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it. Well, good luck this season, and I'll be seeing you at Rayburn.
Right on, man. Thank you.
All right, see you, Mike.